A quote from Gotaga, the Book of Chalk. Beasts only show the white of their eye in terror. Men show it always. A quote from Anonymous. For I have seen the virtuous in hell, and the wicked in heaven, and I swear to you, brother, the scream you hear in one, and the sigh you hear in the other, sound the same. 1119, Year of the Tusk. The north shore of the Neliast Sea. Like many great and dangerous men, Sheonarnra was despised for many things. His penchant for mongering spies not the least of them. The rules that bound the Norserai were unforgiving in those days. Say, the holy mother of cities, was little more than a village huddling behind ruined walls of stone. The god-kings of Imperial Umarau stared blindly from overthrown stone, moss-covered and almost forgotten. The Khand ruled the cities of the River Amrys, an empire they called the Great Hall, and few people were so proud or so headstrong. They divided the ground between the Feel and the Werg, the weak and the glorious. They adhered to a simplicity that was at once a fanaticism. And they judged the way all men were prone to judge in those far antique days, without patience or mercy. Sheonarnra, for his part, celebrated the Khand hatred of spying. What did it matter if they declared him Feel, so long as he knew their secrets? He knew what stout the All-King drank, and what slave decanted it for him. He knew what was bellowed in council and whispered across pillows. Most importantly, he knew what was plotted. So he stood waiting before the gate of his Cyclopean tower, Nogaral, staring southward across the heaving leagues of the Neliast Sea, knowing that soon, very soon, a light would stride across the moonlit waters. To the west lay the river Sursa, whose rusty waters bloomed far into the sea during day. Beyond it, the wastes of Aegongaria plated the horizon, chapped and cracked like untanned leather. Low mountains knotted the north and east, domes of bald granite rising from the forested slopes, the hunched-back Urukis. Nogaral stood upon the westernmost summit, Eros, a mountain that was a mass grave. Little more than a ramp of blunt granite, it climbed from the river toward the sea, where it ended in scarped confusion. Ruins made gums and teeth of its heights, structures obliterated in an age that men could not recollect for ignorance and savagery. Nogaral was both squat and rotund, resembling a monstrous byre more than a proper tower. Only the grand central chamber could boast any architectural splendor. Otherwise, it was cramped and labyrinthine, the lower levels pillared as densely as a forest, the upper levels celled like a hive. The construction of the tower had caused an uproar in Sogleash 2 centuries previous. The Sohonk, in particular, had objected, seeing in it the designs of their old rival, Kettingira. Even then they had suspected. But suspicions were not enough to sway an all-king who'd grown to prize the Mengeka and their disdain of scruple. Nogaral, they named it. The High Round. They are called the Barricades, the non-man says. The artisan himself fashioned them. The man gazes in wonder at the configurations of Nymelin light. So that none might enter, he murmurs. Kettingira lowers his porcelain face in assent. So that none might enter. Sheonarnra almost stumbles. So dazzling is the sunlight across the immense curvatures of gold. So deep is the pitch of the surrounding fall. The non-man steadies him with a firm hand. This is what my master sought? To tear down the barricades? And his masters before him, the non-man replies. For more than 200 years. He studies the mad non-man. And what lies within? The black eyes did not waver. The truth my brothers could not bear. At last he glimpsed it, a point like a failing star. Sheonarnra stood immobile. The wind came from the north, answering the sea's long inhalation. It made lunacy of his hair and braids, slapped his robes with a snared thrush's fury. The distant light blinked through it, a white glitter from across the black back of the sea, vanishing and reappearing as faraway rollers plucked the nocturnal line of the horizon. The wind howled about the tower, made moaning flutes of the surrounding ruin, and it comforted Sheonarnra, even as its violence forced him to lean against his toes. Always at his back, always rushing south, across the sea, and over the painted cities, into the eyes of his witless enemies. The distant spark became more constant, gathered both luminosity and portent as it crept above the blind line of the Neliost. Clouds like scrapes formed a scan across the starry vault. The star the non-man called Imburil cast his shadow over the cobble before him, and Sheonarnra considered the wildness of his wind-blown outline. The wind and the nail, Sheonarnra thought in elation. Both would be at his back. This had been an old habit of his, identifying and assessing omens, born of days when he still walked past the gods could reckon. Had he not known who was about to darken his threshold, he would have cursed himself for a fool for indulging it. The light gathered brightness all out of proportion to its approach, and despite the stain, Sheonarnra found himself wondering at its brilliance. Then finally he saw him. Little more than a region of blackness at first, a shadowy glimpse behind the luminous corona, then more substantial, more human. Titurga. The Sohonk Archdeme walked the low sky, holding high the diurnal, the famed day lantern, a fan of mirrors that reflected the sun even in the deepest night. The glare climbed as he neared, and Sheonarnra watched the great oblong of illumination, impossible daylight, slip across the stony expanses, reaching out towards Nogaral. It seemed miraculous, the weightlessness of the light, the way whole fields of detail and swinging shadows could be dandled in the thin-fingered hands of a man. The day lantern scrolled over the rising slopes, then at last caught Nogaral's western curve, where it paused as though fixed. And from night, Sheonarnra found himself staring into day. The pitch and scrawl of ruin, the black mortices sketching the stones of the tower's ponderous wall, the knots of scrub and hanging weed. For the first time, he saw how shadows were simply pieces of night. And even though he knew, as profoundly, as fanatically, as only a member of the Holy Consult could, he found himself wondering how it had come to this. Sheonarnra could not help but marvel. The sun! The sun itself, raised in the hands of a man. Squinting, he could see him, Titurga, his outline gilded in the manner of those peering into the bright outside from the recesses of a dark room. The great hero mage, come to deliver his ultimatum. The legendary Archdemu Sohonku, the glorious pupil, perhaps the most powerful sorcerer the ground had ever known. At last Titurga saw him below, and the diurnal answered his sudden attention. Sheonarnra could no more look at the man than he could look into the sun. He raised his arms like a slave in summer fields, and for the first time he witnessed the magic of the diurnal from the inside. Blue skies had been pulled across the void of night, his skin pricked with the promise of sunburn. It was a sight so miraculous as to almost blot the stain, the premonition of deceit that marred all things sorcerous. He watched the false sun set in the false sky, then stop, low and bloody as sunset, throwing shadows outward along lines that non-men could describe in arithmetic. Titurga had set the day lantern down, he realized. The hero mage would deny the advantages that night bestows upon cunning. No matter. The shadow of the walking archdeme reminded Sheonarnra long before the man. "The diurnal," Titurga called, still a silhouette in the man's cauldron. "Emilides gave it to me." "Archdeme," Sheonarnra said in numb greeting. "Sheonarnra," Titurga replied, coming to a step mere paces from him. He was tall, broad of shoulder. He wore a Perkandi cloak over his black woolen robes, 2 wolfskins sewn together, so that the tailings of the face fluttered side by side below his groin. His hair was white, spun with the odd memory of gold. It matched his physique, holding something of its cascading form even in the wind. But it was his high, blunt face that commanded attention, shallow of nose, thick of brow and cheek, and of course the bronze skull of an infant child braided into his beard, his famed totem. "Archdeme," Sheonarnra repeated, offering the ritual repetition at once a rebuke and a reprieve. To refer to equals by name before formal greetings was an affront among the Umeri. Had the Archdemu Sohunku at last adopted the crude ways of the Khand? "You look pale," Titurga said. "It is good that I bring sunlight." Sheonarnra snorted. "You Mengeka," the hero mage continued, "always thinking that wisdom is a mushroom. The ground is so broad, and yet you and your brothers insist on digging deep." A sour look. "Nogaral greets you, Archdeme." Titurga walked about him, as if pacing the high corner of a circle. He carried himself as only a master of the Sohunk, the learned school, could. Erect in the manner of nimble, sound-sleeping men, relaxed in the way of high clan nobility, he gestured to the marmoreal wreckage about them, the stumps of pillars struck in arrested daylight. "The ruins of Viri." "The very same," Sheonarnra replied. "A lesson," Titurga said, "to those who would dig too deep." Sheonarnra sighed conspicuously. "To what do I owe the honor of this visit?" he asked, gesturing for Titurga to enter his vast abode. "Whispers," Titurga responded, drawing his gaze about him before stepping into the shadow of Nogaral's gate. He was making an inventory, Sheonarnra knew, of all the wards coiled within the stonework about him. Nothing that could threaten him, certainly. Casting a final glance at the impossible dusk, Sheonarnra strode forward, bearing his back the way the laws of hospitality demanded. He fairly cracked his teeth for apprehension. He passed beneath the enormous lintel, into the warmth of plastered walls. The wind's roar was pinched into a chalky whistle. A step ahead of the hero mage, Sheonarnra walked on a bolt of sunlight so bright that for the first several paces the braziers were filled with wavering invisibility for fire. "Whispers brought you here?" "Aye," the man said from behind. "They say that you have found something." Had he not known Titurga, Sheonarnra would have thought him a rank fool coming here like this, alone. But he knew Titurga's might, and more importantly, he knew the way the man used hectoring boldness to magnify that might. To come here like this was to say that he could arrive at any time, and that he possessed no fear. Sheonarnra paused and turned, regarded his old rival. The man had a warrior's face, chipped from fearless bone, everything blunt in the way of shields. What does it matter what we find? He said. The Ark is a riddle without solution. The first hard moment passed between them. Who, the Archdemu Sohonku replied, can say which riddles can or cannot be solved beforehand? He gazes past the mad nodmen to the second horn, vast and golden, its phallic curve canted over the mountainous ruins of the occlusion. None possessed my cunning. Ketangira lowers his chin to his chest. We shall see. Come, Sheonarnra said. Loose your gaze. See. You will understand what I mean. He resumed leading Taturga down the main reception hall, winding the small, as the non-men put it, affecting careless questions about the affairs of the all. Do they still riot in Sogleash? The library is secure, the Sohonkin singer said in clipped dismissal. And yet, I see Nogarol is all but abandoned, he added in an airy, peering about corners tone. Just as they say. The Archdemon of the Mangekka resisted looking back, knowing the hero mage smiled. Who says? At last, they outran the final vestiges of the day lantern. Their shadows now jumped in counterpoint, sweeping like spiders' legs as they approached, and passed each of the corridor's flaming braziers. Your spies, Sheonarnra. The Archdemu Mangekku managed to stifle his laughter. They walked the remainder of the corridor in silence. Despite his worry, Sheonarnra had occasion to feel shame for the mean and brutish nature of his abode. For in spite of everything, he had been raised in Umeri of the Long Bones, the same as Taturga. He knew the askance judgments, the summary ease of the man's condemnation. Only dogs dwelt in kennels. But what did it matter, this false home, when their true abode would drop any mortal to his knees? The Ark. They could stack 100 libraries within it, 1,000. At last, they entered the broad circle of the Asina, the expansive hub of Nogarol. The great rug, woven of brushed white grasses, softened both the floor and the gloom. Bronze tripods glowered golden, casting yellow petals across the weave. Tablet racks fashioned of black ash loomed about the chamber's circumference. Sheonarnra stifled a grin of duping glee, knowing that a stylus had never touched any of them. He walked towards the lone attendant, a near-naked Skintian slave, who awaited them with refreshment near the center. He paused and turned when he realized that Taturga had failed to follow him. There is someone beneath me, the hero mage said, scowling. Someone deeply stained. Sheonarnra paused, nodded. A precaution, nothing more. It is of no consequence. Wrath flashed into Taturga's eyes. Nevertheless, there remains someone beneath me. Someone hooded in our shared sin. They gazed at each other with the flat hostility of lizards. Sheonarnra found himself shirking first, if only to hasten the pantomime, or so he reassured himself. Even still, he could feel the prickle of stink beneath his robes, the ache of expectation in his throat. Must I take precautions of my own? Taturga asked, his voice as mild as blades in water. The Archdemu Mangekku made as if his throat required clearing. I apologize. He will withdraw. This earned a heartbeat of avid scrutiny. No, I would like to hold him in my eye. Again, Sheonarnra found himself wilting before the hero mage's glare, exactly, it seemed to him, as he would have in old days. Paramount among the many worries that had plagued this mad gambit was the fear that he could no longer be the feel that Taturga would expect him to be. Now that death had become his sole horror. Now that he had seen. Very well, Sheo Narnra conceded, bowing in the shallow cursive way of the Umeri. He turned to the attendant. Summon our... He paused as if at the humor of the word Uncas had delivered to him. Our guest. His terror plain, the young slave scampered into the gloom of the nearest hallway. Sheo Narnra resumed suffering Turturga's onerous regard. And contempt, as it turned out. They speak of you often, in Umarau and Soglish, Turturga said, his manner sinister for being so bland. They say you have the eyes of a serpent. Sheo Narnra smiled. Vanity had been a well-known flaw of his, yes. He had preened in the days before. No, just a dog, no different from other men. What a child he'd been. They call it the threshold, a narrow phalange of iron set high upon the upright horn, the hanging porch of the barricades, which the Ishroi of old had raised about the uppermost sanctum of their wicked foe. You can see the non-men there, as much as not, sitting on the edge, where the air is too thin for fat men to breathe, waiting for souls more ordered than his own to tear down the barricades. What the artisan has wrought, Sheo Narnra says to him, does not seem possible. The Archdemu Mengeku nods. Yes, but only if you look at it as something to be forced. Tears well in the non-men's eyes. What are you saying? Some doors need not be broken. The attendant reappeared, pale, eyes anxious unto rolling. A raggish shadow lurched beyond the threshold behind him, a movement that would have been limping were it not balanced leg for leg. At the last instant, Sheo Narnra turned to watch the mighty Turturga's face. He saw the famed eyes slacken, dull, even weary, in the manner of wise men grasping the inevitability of horrific futures. How many years of concerned watching, how many months of laborious counsel, fretting this very possibility. An odor of sweat and fish insinuated the chamber. They stood thus, motionless. Something fluid had entered the breathing silence of the room, a fluttering of mucus and membrane. Even though nothing was said, Sheo Narnra could see it plain in the hero mage's look. True. The dread rumors were true. The Archdemu Mengaku turned to the newcomer, as much to conceal his smile as to bask in the glory of his foul image. For he had literally wept upon finding him and his brother, wept for joy, knowing that the two could decipher the horror of what they had seen. The creature stood naked, as was his wont, his wings folded into wicked hooks about either side of his great skull, which would have been cumbersome had it not been curved into a crest, narrow and deep, like an oyster set on end. A proportionate face hung from the fore, loutish with the absence of expression, nostrils drawn into shining gashes, sockets plugged with lobes of bare white meat. A second face filled the mouth, sheathing a second skull, fused within the crocodilian jaws of the greater. Second eyes regarded the hero mage with leering expectation. Second lips grinned about teeth like nails. The light cast by the tripods slicked the creature in lines of luminous white, yellow, and crimson, but otherwise the intestinal translucence of its skin rendered it devoid of color, the pallor of things drawn from the depths. Though he stood no more than half again as tall as a man, he seemed enormous for the wings, for the fiendish stoop, for the webbing of stone-dense muscle. And Sheo Narnra could feel the tugging glamour, the promise of surrender within irresistible limbs. He could feel his own ardor rise, an answering will to be taken, ravished. Orang, a fabled Inkoroi, a creature out of legend and childhood terror. His lover. He bears the stain as deeply as any Kuya, Sheonarnra heard Turturgus say from behind him. The Mengekan archdeme turned from his infatuation to face his hated foe. Is this why you await me thus? The hero mage said. He bent his head in a curious, almost Cooneroi way, as if some rage to kill bent him from within. Do you think that combined you could rival me? And Sheonarnra knew that this was no ploy, that Turturga would, without breath of hesitation, deliver his impossible fury to his tower. He had heard the tales. The whole ground had heard the tales. Turturga Mithlara, they called him, the giver of mercy. Ironic renown for his ruthless extermination of his foes. He was certainly the most powerful Insinger ever born, and, if what Ketangira said was true, the most powerful period. No living Kuya had the purity of his recitations. Even his stain was different, somehow muted, as if he could cut the inward without scarring it. Even now, simply regarding him, his distinction literally glared from his image, a strange, sideways rinsing of the stain. The vital difference. The threat. They said he had been blind as a child, that Noshainrao himself had found him begging in the streets. They said he went mad while canting. They said his words seized things that should not be seized. Sheonarnra gestured to the attendant to dispense the sere. The fool almost fumbled the vessels for terror. Rival you? He replied, under cover of this trivial distraction. The ground is at peace. The Skintia are pacified. The All-King watches from Umarau. He turned with a bronze vessel that Turturga waved away. Orang is my guest, he said, sipping the burning liquor. The hero mage did not shout or rave. He did not need to. So grating was the resolve of his voice. It is Inkoroi! He spat the name with its clipped, non-man inflection, the hatred of his teachers cracking his voice. Inkoroi. For the first time, he let slip his Umeri face, the one that would claim all judgment for itself. Such was the gulf that divided the field from the Werg, and beseeched his rival archdeme. Sheonarnra, think! Think. No word was so raw with ancient assumption. The Archdemu Mengaku simply regarded his Sohonk counterpart the way one might regard a fool brother who has yet again spoken foolishly. Something scarcely perceptible hardened the man's stance and manner. I will not implore you a second time, old friend. Finally, a genuine threat. Sheonarnra pursed his lips against the tickle of his thin mustache, sighed as if in profound resignation. He glanced at the black coin of Sere swinging in the bottom of his appropriated cup, downed it with a gasp. How could the man know? Even with his rumored grace. There was no going back, no undoing what had been done, no unseeing. Sheonarnra had committed unspeakable, nay, unthinkable acts. They all had. Debaucheries, desecrations of self and others, shrieks for cries of passion, blood for Greece. Mere recollection set his skin afire, such was the orgiastic ecstasy. He had exalted in the trackless void, the whole where good and evil had once been. And he had resolved most of all, for he had seen. He watches the true sun rise above the horizon's crown, low and bloody as sunset, throwing shadows outward along lines that non-men could describe in arithmetic. He could sense Ketengira's desperation. So he prolongs the reverie, pretending to wonder at the fragments of darkness scoring the broken landscape below. Then he turns to the barricades, examines its fractal complexities. He begins to sing. His voice slips the point of vocalization, drops outward in every direction, until all of creation sings with him. Between his hands, a needle of raw incandescence twists into existence, shines with a brilliance undimmed by the glare of dawn. Sheonon returns to the great non-Mankuya. "Do you see, old friend?" Ketangira stands gazing, parsed by the sun into silken light and dolphin shadow. A vulture rides the great arc in the blue emptiness behind him, ragged and black. More and more, the scavengers have taken to circling the horns. "The barricades," he continues. "They fold. Intervals. Somehow, Emilitis found a way to pinch emptiness into angles. This was why no dispensation of sheer force could batter them down. In a sense, everything you and my predecessors threw at it simply missed." The black eyes pierce him. "And what is this?" "A mathesis pin, a derivative of an ancient Enteleshi theorem. It whittles force down to an arithmetical point, pricks where all else bludgeons." Wonder dawns in the ancient gaze. A force that does not occupy space cannot be redirected in space. "Yes," Sheonarnra says, "my gift to you." He could feel it all the time, what he had seen. Feel it like worms in his bones, rotting him, making him less substantial than what he was. A tingling fog, a meaty flex. Horror now thumbed the edges of his every sensation. The image of his damnation. "Who are you to condemn?" Sheonarnra cried, in the mock way of two learned men. "The schools have no stake in non-man wars." This much was true. The Siku were loath to speak of the war. Even Ketangira, who had led the Mengeka to the Ark, and the revelation of the Zir Kirimakra. Their feud with the Inkoroi was theirs, and theirs alone, so much so that they denied their mannish pupils all but the most elliptical knowledge of it. But Turturga frowned, as if at some tiresome juvenile. "Who are you to decide our stake?" Sheonarnra stood blinking, cursing. "How?" he cried, holding out an arm to the hoary majesty of Orang. "How can you fools not see how small this makes us?" "Plainly," Turturga replied, frowning at the creature's groin. "Fool! The stakes of everything have been rewritten. Everything!" At long last, fury clenched Turturga's brow. "What was sane before we knew of the Ark remains sane now! Sheonarnra, this thing is obscene!" Why could they not see? They were every bit as damned as he. Damned! What overriding reason could there be? What possible logic could annul eternity? The sky, Turturga. Think! The sky is an endless void. Each star is another sun, like our own. The grounds spin about them, whole grounds hanging like motes in the great void. He was not simply offering them salvation, he was showing them sanity. "Other grounds," Turturga cried, with a derisive bark. And why not? When the ground was by definition the very basis of everything. It was just as Orax had said, truth becomes ignorance when men make gods of deceit. "I know how this sounds," Sheonarnra said. "But what of the Ark? The Inkoroi? They prove the existence of other grounds, do they not? Grounds like our own." "No," the glistening Inkoroi rasped, speaking an archaic intonation of Hirimsu, his inhuman voice falling like a flake of ice upon sweaty skin. He had stepped into Sheonarnra's blind flank and now loomed over him, his frame a sleek motley, like fish skinned and sutured together. "Not like your own." The hero mage fairly gaped at the creature. "It speaks to me." "This ground," Orang continued, oblivious to his transgression. "This ground is the one promised. Salvation lies within your grasp. Salvation in this life." "Insolence! Other voices must commend yours before you speak," Shao Narnra said to the creature, trusting the savagery of his backward glance to serve as a warning. But Orang continued his shining scrutiny of Turturga, a transgression that Shao Narnra found unnerving. "Do you not fear damnation?" A careful look from the hero mage. "The non-men," he said evenly. "They have taught us how to hide our voices, how to bypass the outside, find oblivion." Eyes like bladders of ink, each reflecting the tripods across their shining curve, the fluting of gill tissues along the neck. "You worship the spaces between the gods." "Yes." A rasp like the screams of faraway children tangled in the wind. In Koroi laughter. "You are already damned. All of you are already damned." "So say you." A deep-chested rumble, popping mucus. "So says the inverse fire." A flush of horror. Shao Narnra tensed against the sudden loosening in his bowel, not quite believing that the Inkoroi had dared name it aloud. Zur Kiri Makra, the inverse fire. For a heartbeat, he found his voice divided between mere fear and what mattered. What? Did Orang seek to seduce the Sohonk Archdeme? Could he not see that Turturga was not one to suffer rivals? That Shao Narnra himself would be doomed were he to embrace their holy consult? But these were vain questions. They fell away as quickly as Uncas offered them up. So flimsy were the concerns that moved them. All that mattered, the ground's only consequential thing, was what he had seen. Damnation. Experience shredded into 1,000 strings, each clawed and burned, sucked like bottomless bones. Agony, anguish, horror, lament, shame. Shrieking, thrashing, screaming through the throat of his every memory, innumerable and one, groaning, choking, vomiting his every particle a unique agony, a bereavement, a weeping, howling, scratching out eyes that grew and grew to witness anew, while burning, blistering, breaking. It defeated the tongue, the intellect, what he had seen. Nevertheless, it was in him, every moment in him, if not at the center of his care, then beneath, a hole that endlessly gnawed at his gut. A terror so profound, so abiding, and yes, pure, that all other fears guttered into nothingness for lack of air. A terror that was a gift. Such was the peace and certainty that followed upon it. They had conjectured, the Mengeka. They had experimented. They had taken captives and inflicted every possible agony simultaneously, all in the name of some flimsy purchase, some scant knowledge of hell. Drawing toenails, while crushing genitals, while setting afire, while murdering children, raping wives, strangling mothers, blinding fathers. They had visited lunatic misery on innocence, and they had found themselves utterly impervious, immune to the least remorse. Some of them had even laughed. What was earthly anguish compared to what awaited them? Singular, ephemeral. Little more than a bauble laid upon the monumental steps of the wretchedness to come. They were deluded fools, the schoolmen of the Sohonk. Every one of them lived making belief. Even more, making witless and numb when it came to their voices. It was sorcery they coveted, the lure of power, such potency. The voice had a way of walling off the future when power was at hand.
All men wailed. All men burned all the time. They need only die to realize it. So this is the source of your madness, Turturga said. The inverse fire. Sheonarnra closed his eyes against a shudder. So you know of it, he said on a long intake of breath. Nilgikis told me, yes. He told you of the three? The three who entered the golden court of Sil during the scourging of the Ark? Upon the upright horn, yes. So you know what happened? A draught whisked through the chamber, the kind that washes over a floor of cloistered air in a flood. The golden infant skull braided into the hero mage's beard seemed to laugh for the to and fro sway of the fires potted upon the bronze tripods. It struck Sheonarnra that Turturga had stood absolutely motionless ever since setting foot in the Asina. He seemed hewn of heavy oak as it was, but standing as he did, glaring from man to Inkoroi to man again, he almost seemed a thing of stone, indestructible. Minoroikis had fallen, the hero mage replied. The Ishroi labored in vain to destroy the Ark, as did the Kuya. They knew of the Golden Coit, the inverse from Ninjanjin. Sheonarnra found himself interrupting. Why? Why did they insist on repeating its name? A thing need not be named to be spoken of. Yes, from Ninjanjin, Turturga repeated, something not quite identifiable sparking in his eyes. And because they knew, Nilgikis chose the three to enter it. Two Ishroi renowned for their valor, Misarikis and Renaidil, and one Kuya. He paused as though he set his teeth against hatred. Ketingira. Sheonarnra found himself turning to the Inkoroi, cackling, crying, "He knows!" in a voice too maniacal to be his own. "He knows!" I know only what Nilgikis told me, that Misarikis and Runaidil returned shrieking. Yes, Sheonarnra had also shrieked, for a time, and wept. And that Ketingira counseled his king to have them killed. A barking laugh. And did he tell you why? A moment of fierce scrutiny. Because they could not be trusted, because they had been ensorcelled. Possessed. No, Sheonarnra heard himself cry. No! Could this be him, wagging his head like a fly-maddened ox, gesticulating like an old hag at a funeral? Because they had seen the truth! Turturga gazed with undisguised distaste. Such is the form of all possession. You know as much— No! Sheonarnra cried. Nilgikis lied to you. What else could he do? Think of the war they had just won, of the toll. The non-men had sacrificed everything, their wives, their daughters, to triumph over the Inkoroi, and now they discover all along the truth belonged to their foe. The Archdemu Mengaku began berating himself even before he finished. Such was the unmanly violence of his expression. He had to recollect himself. Recall! He had to own what happened here, not for the sake of men, for none would ever know, but for the sake of his immortal voice. Nilgikis lied to his Ishroi, he continued, speaking on a long-drawn breath. Just as he deceived you, he lied because he had to.
Turturga stood watching him, his fulsome lips hanging open in hesitation. And Sheonarnra rejoiced, knowing even the mighty hero mage had his doubts. That the Mengeka could be seduced was no surprise, for they had always placed knowledge before honor. But Ketingira, the most famed of the Siku, for that matter, how could any non-man enter into a pact with Inkoroi? Unless— Sheonarnra cackled, feeling a new deliberation sop the wildness from his bones. Horrifying, isn't it? Turturga, hero of the Umarau, disciple of No Rao, to think that everything you've believed you've believed for naught. A whole life expended, toiling, condemning, murdering, all in the name of misapprehension. The gaze of an old and undefeated chieftain. What has become of you, old friend? Narnra had expected many things from this visit, but never that it would become so quaint. Yes, he said on a sigh, you did know me before. You knew many of us. You knew how fractious we were, how given to mercenary pursuits, all the mannish flaws that you so honk used to evidence your superiority. You remember when gold was all that you needed to induce treason? He raised a hectoring fist, one royal Umeri to another. And now you hear the whispers, the rumors. He drew his hand out to embellish the sarcasm. Your torturers shake, so deep they must reach. He stepped forward as he spoke, coming to a halt directly before the hero mage and his legendary wrath. Something in the man's height and proportion made him think of the non-man heroes and how they never ceased growing. Possessed, you tell yourselves. Possessed! We are different because we are no longer ourselves. You counsel the All-King to crack our seal, destroy us and all that we have toiled to achieve. Our voices are polluted, unclean. He threw us back in feel laughter, cackled in spite and glee. So tell me, if we are possessed, who is our new owner? The Techne, the Archdemosohonku said, with grim confidence. The Mengeka have been enslaved. You have been enslaved. Narnra blinked. Of course the fool was unmoved. Of course he had his reasons. No matter. This was an indulgence, arguing like this, availing reason. He warred with his expression, something between a grimace and a grin. Yes. But who is our new master? A peculiar weariness haunted Turturga as he shook his maned head. One not so much of as for. Feel, something whispered from his gaze. A lunatic god, perhaps. The hells that you think you see. Something adulterate, foul, something that craves feasting, that hungers with an intensity that can bend the very ground. Orang had stood silent during this time, gazing down at the two bickering men. After the intimacies that they had shared, it seemed Narnra could sense the pulse of his passion, lust in the lazy tumescence of his member, impatience in the incline of his shield-long head, hatred in the flicker of membranes. Does that not trouble you? The hero mage pressed. That you have but one eye? Tedious, tedious, tedious. Why, Turturga? Narnra implored. Why have you come here? He shook his head, arguing with the floor. Did you hope to show me my folly? And it all seemed like a pantomime, this incontinence of voice and expression. For beneath, he knew exactly what he needed to do. He could feel it, the certainty of snakes coiled in the darkness, the confidence of things that neither run nor sleep. There's no folly in what I do, I assure you. I know, I have seen. He jerked his face back, squinting and scowling. What are your reasons compared to this? Your guesses? Your rumors of a dead age? But what, Narnra? What is it you have seen? Your damnation? Or your goad? Did you hope to strike a bargain? Narnra exclaimed, spinning to face the hero mage. Or did you come here to cow me? To strut, and boast, and discourse, thinking that the throat of my design might choke on the bone of your glorious presence? The hero mage had stalked him in a curious, distanced way, careful to move at tangents that would keep him facing both his antagonists, mannish and Incoroi. His manner, which had seemed lazy with arrogance but a moment earlier, had become wary, expectant. Turturga, did you come here to kill? For the first time, The man surprised him. Of course I did. 6 days Ketangira, the most famed of the Siku, the most feared and hated, stands upon the high threshold, the arcane bass of his voice climbing from the pores of all that could be seen, his arms outstretched, a myriad of methesis pins drawn into a circle sparkling white before him, a disk of needles, endlessly pricking the fractal intricacies of the barricades. And Sheo Narnra, the Balancer's son, who had risen to become the Archdemu Mengaku, master of the cunning school, felt a different fear hiss through the anxious hum of his schemes. He retreated, as if in disgust, took 4 steps, steeling himself against the impulse to cringe, because at any instant, any heartbeat, he could find himself cut, or bludgeoned, or blasted from this world, and... "Kill me?" he heard himself say, his tone far from manly. The hero mage laughed his famed laugh, the one that had inspired so many lays. With his beard and wolfskin cloak, he looked both savage and indomitable, every bit as elemental as the legends painted him. With his stain, drawn and tinctured in a manner no man or non-man had ever seen, he seemed outrageous with power. "No, my friend," he said, letting his gaze stray to the Inkoroi, hulking and inhuman. "I have come to kill this obscenity." A new age was dawning. Since the first father, men had always spoken to command the ground. Since the shamans, they had called, and reality had answered. A brother, a deceiver, an assassin. But there was another way, one without the treacherous hooks of meaning, one built up out of the granules of existence, the way termites raise their multiform wattle. A power that could be crafted and shaped, that could be applied to its own proliferation, and so accelerate, radiating out across the span of need and desire. A power that could uproot cities and hurl them across the void. The Techne. Mechanism. Only mechanism could save their voices. "Perhaps it is fitting," Turturga said to the glistening Inkoroi, advancing a step. "Perhaps this is your doom, to die here on the grave of Viri." Wheezing silence. "Sheo Narnra," Orang finally said. "I tire of this." "Patience, my brother," the Mengekin Archdeme replied, drawing the Inkoroi back by the forearm, pressing him to the perimeter of the grand room. It would happen soon. "Brother!" the hero mage cried, his voice cracked with what seemed genuine dismay, pained incredulity. "You call this monstrosity brother?" Only now was it dawning on the fool, the intimacy of their pact, the truth of their holy consult. Only now, Sheo Narnra realized, could he see how profoundly damnation had conjoined them. Man, non-man, Inkoroi. 6 days. Until his voice dwindled into a rasp, until blood fell from his nose, tracing the branches of his grimace. 6 days singing. Turturga strode toward him, to the center of the Asina, to the point where all the glittering fires overlapped. Sheo Narnra resisted the urge to raise his hands in warding. He understood why the bards called him the bull in their songs, the way he lowered his face to glare through his brows, how he puffed out his chest, huffed fury through his flared nose, how he trembled for rage. Turturga was the very embodiment of the Wurg, a true long-boned son of Umarau. He used all the tools the gods bequeathed him, including his famed stature. He always came close. Eventually. Always loomed, carrying the stink of the garlic they so prized in Soglish. Vanity. Nothing makes men more predictable. "You will answer for this, Sheo Narnra." The Archdemu Mengaku turned his back on the hero mage for a third and final time. He glanced at Orang, who fairly hunched over his famished loins, and in Koroi battle stance. "You will face me, feel!" He nodded to the black shining eyes. "Face me!" Turturga thundered, his voice booming so raw that spiders seemed to scuttle across Sheonarnra's spine and back. "Need I show you the fact of your damnation?" A sorcerous word sizzled across the corners of everything. Orang's eyes flared crimson. "Face me or A crack of wooden stone, beam and joist. Sheonarnra whirled just in time to see it happen, the floor dropping, the brushed rug sucked down, folding into ravines about the falling hero mage, the tripods tipping outward, fires bursting into sparks, the whole slipping into the plummet, a great white iris dropping into the deeper stages of gloom. Gone. Sheonarnra finds the non-man thus, sprawled unconscious before the barricades, or what remains of them. He kneels at his side, lays fingers on his cheek. Warm. He looks to the shattered portal, to the hanging plates, the mangle of the stain. His immobility shocks him as much as his terror shames. He has always been proud with power, Sheonarnra, knowing that even the Kuya wonder at his subtlety. But now he is simply a man, a lowly mortal, and he can smell his own stink taint the aura of burning. The true sun is rising behind him. The shadow of the threshold arcs across the soaring cylinder of gold. He sees his frail silhouette hunched atop it, and he watches it descend, as inexorable as the rising dawn, sinking into the maw of the broken barricades. He shivers uncontrollably. Only when the sun has drawn even to his height, when the first light draws his outline into the barricades within, does he stand upon the spine of his own shadow. How could mere knowledge command such horror? He will see for himself. The whole center of the chamber, gone. It was not for nothing the Mengeka had come here. It was not for nothing they had raised no Garal upon the ruins of ancient Viri. Intent on plundering the dead mansion, they took the vast pit they had discovered, the Veridic Well, as the axle of their construction, and so unknowingly created the one trap that could destroy the famed Turturga. A great dank rose from the blackness, the stench of a mountain rotted with hollows. In ancient times, the well had sounded Viri, a city as magisterial as Ishtarbinth, and deep, stuck into the ground's very root. Sheonarnra teetered for a moment, his senses unbalanced by the cavernous absence before and below. He steadied himself, then leaned to better cast his spit after his foe. "Ticus pirielmor gramnihol!" he cried, the ancient curse of his forefathers. He glimpsed a white twinkle sparking far below, a tube of surrounding stone. A sorcerous mutter climbed from the bottomless reek. He blinked in disbelief. "Quickly!" the nude Inkoroi cried, a noise like a dog's cough. He walks into the golden gloom, squinting, staring. Dust puffs about his feet, particles blooming in the intrusive brilliance of the sun, then vanishing into the flanking darkness. He peers, notices a different luminance waving across the interior, more fluid and sultry, webbed as though refracted through waters. Cants of concussion. So the man and the Inkoroi began, blasting the circular lip, striking great fractures into the grain of the rock, so that the well's mouth sloughed into its throat, a rumbling, clacking torrent. They pulled down the roofs of the Asina, bearing the deceit that was high blue sky. They stepped into sunlight. The Inkoroi beat his great scabbed wings, rising high upon the relentless wind, spiraling like a vulture about a falling beast. The man stood upon the earth's phantom, hanging. Their skulls were as chalices of arcane light. Their disparate voices seemed thrown from the horizon's farthest corners, the mutter of petulant gods, and the light of the diurnal bathed them, so they seemed to glow in the way of things held high in the sun's declining light. Their own shadows halved them, so that from certain angles they seemed naught but the rims of who they once were. Kuyan sorceries inscribed the empty spaces. Structure collapsed into the afterimage of searing geometries. Orang husked the tower from without as he sailed in broad circles, slowing into a climb when he turned into the wind, then swooping about in a descending arc. The diurnal's arcane sun warmed cloth, pinched skin. Sheonarnra gouged the tower from within, hanging above the crater Decina, his hair and garment lashed into fins and ribbons. Sections of wall pitched into blackness, roared against the throat of the well. Furnishings glittered like tossed torches, scraped and skidded, trailing clouds of orange sparks before blackness encompassed them. Together they pulled down Nogaral, the high round, raised it into a heap over the mouth of the well. He hears it, a faraway wind, the groan of impossible multitudes, the collective shriek. His lungs become as stone. Horror makes pins of his skin, and he feels it, the burning vaults above, the smoldering glimpses. Sheonarnra raises his eyes. At last they pause to regard their labor. The Inkoroi alighting upon the same spectral floor that bore Sheonarnra. Crimson sunlight bathed the southern ramps, inking the numberless crevices across the rack and ruin, and they rejoiced, man and Inkoroi. They had no inkling of the greater violence their sorcery had unleashed. The sky cracked, Eros shuddered, the impossible sun tipped and stumbled. Plumes of ejecta exploded from points along the mountain's perimeter, scarcely visible for the diurnal's encompassing glare. The mound that had been Nogaral shrugged, then slumped into its contradiction. It was as if a dome of cloth had been pressed into a dimple. Summit became basin, illumination became shadow. The mountain had been rotten with Viri. Its innumerable ways fractioned by the cataclysmic impact of the Ark thousands of years before. The underworld mansion imploded, collapsed inward and downward, tier upon tier, hall upon hall, undone by this final indignity, this last outrage. The man and the Inkoroi toppled with it. Though suspended, they remained bound to the earth, and as with all drastic changes of circumstance, the meaning of their sorcery ceased to be. Only Orang's wings saved them. The Inkoroi seized the man from kicking emptiness, bore him up beyond the diurnal blue into the truth that was cold and night. They set foot upon the depression's edge. The day lantern painted a disheveled landscape, drawing their shadows into the darkness of the great concavity below. The earth still shivered, resounded with hidden percussions, knocking dust into smoky halos of debris. Sheonarnra laughed in the crazed, marveling way of children who find their destruction multiplied beyond belief. Once again he succumbed to the sacrilege of fate, he who walked ways invisible to the gods. He exulted in this sign, rejoiced that his hated foe would have a pit and not a barrow to memorialize his fall. And as the echoes trailed into cavernous thunder, he began singing, as a true long-boned son of Umarau should. Your pride lies shattered with your shield, your wrath curls bleeding upon the field. Now you linger in my shade weeping, mourning an honor that is my keeping, praying for children who are mine to enslave, beseeching lovers who are mine to deprave. So the Archdemu Mengeku intoned, a paean for his vanquished enemy, a lament that was at once a psalm to his own glory and the might of their holy consort. For nothing mattered apart from what they had seen. Nothing. They coupled on the smoking slopes, man and Inkoroi, their silhouettes entangled, arching against a skewed, perpetually setting sun. They grunted for wonder, wheezed with ecstasy. They gazed in delirium, cried out across the great bowl of ruin, over flames arrayed in descending echelons, like teeth growing out of a shark's throat. And daylight stained everything. a false pocket of sun in the night. The infinite night.